David, Taiwan is the flashpoint. If you look at what international affairs experts have said over the past few years, this is the place where there's the highest likelihood of real, true friction or even war between China and the United States, because Taiwan is so very important to China. China has a natural military advantage because of the proximity geographically to Taiwan. Would be harder for the United States to fight, essentially fighting on China's home turf, if you will, by fighting in Taiwan. In fact, war games conducted by the US Defense Department over the past few years have showed that the United States actually would lose wars to China if there was an all-out conflict over Taiwan, and that's being seen as a possibility. As for this latest incursion into the air identification zone, listen, China plays a long, steady game. I don't think it's right to read this as some kind of sign that something is imminent. And that's, of course, what analysts have been saying, and I agree with it. But it is, again, part of China's very slow, very gradual, very long-term plan to try to exert more influence and more power in Asia. And, of course, that's the reason for the US pivot. Ultimately, when it comes to Taiwan, the question is just how far will the United States be willing to go to defend and fight for Taiwan? It's an open question, maybe one of the more important open questions right now in the medium to long term in international affairs, because if there is a conflict over Taiwan, Taiwan would need the United States and its allies to be fighting potentially in an all-out war against China, as apocalyptic as that sounds. And there's a question of whether the United States would do it and how far the United States would go.
Now, on the topic of deterrence, decades, really, it's been seen that the economy is tied so tightly to China and the United States, especially in the realm of currency, that this was unthinkable that China would take such provocative actions to overturn the apple cart, to basically go to war with the United States. What do those prospects look like today in terms of how the economies are built? Is this just provocation in the skies, or is there real interest on China's part to do something on the ground?
Right, well, China hasn't done anything yet, and partly for the reasons that you mentioned. China's strategy is a bit different, to very slowly, very gradually build up its military, build up its influence in Asia, nibble away at the influence of its allies, use, of course, not only military power, but also economic power, if possible, to the extent China has it, soft power also, to try to exert more and more influence and build a real sphere of influence in Asia. And you've obviously seen over the past few decades China's success in doing that. By the way, one comment that's been made about this issue of the incursions into Taiwan's identification zone is that it's not just about the island of Taiwan itself. Taiwan has outlying islands that in some cases are very, very close. In the case of two islands, really off the coast of China, much, much closer to China than they are to Taiwan. And one of these islands is at the northern tip of the South China Sea, where, of course, China is engaged in a decade-long border dispute, essentially, in terms of maritime territory with a number of other countries in the region, potential resources in the South China Sea. It's also strategic along shipping lines, and that's also been a potential place for real friction with the United States, so this may be connected to that. But yeah, China doesn't have, at least at this point, a strategy of going into a full-out conflict with the United States. I think, David, because it doesn't feel it needs it, that it has other tools to use to try to exert more influence. And even in Taiwan, China has economic cards to play. Also within Taiwanese public opinion, there is a not small part of the public opinion in China, in Taiwan rather, of course, a democratic country that holds democratic elections, that's essentially pro-China and wants a more conciliatory policy to China. It's not the majority, it's not the party in power, but China also has that card to play. But over the medium to long term, as there is more friction between China and the United States, and as Taiwan, at least the majority of public opinion there, starts to become more stubborn in terms of resisting the Chinese, more use of force could, of course, be on the table.